Connections. And well, Sly might have wondered, for the problem was so clear, so terrible. The earth was dying. To be more specific, the earth was being killed. Done to death by its fond owners, killed by the pursuit of money. For the men gathered around the table, it was so utterly frustrating to have inherited the earth and then have the damn thing die on you. And of course, its death would mean their death, or everybody's death. Like it or not, the human race, powerful though it is, remains only a part of the astonishingly complex chain of beings that makes up life on Earth. It's not an island and cannot survive without the other life forces, the life forces that create the oxygen and food, that clean the water and protect us from the sun, the forces that bind the soil together and prevent the deserts spreading across the whole globe, the forces that keep the ice caps from melting and drowning us all. It's all connections. If dung beetles didn't eat cow shit, we'd be knee-deep in flies by now. Eating cow shit's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Luckily, either by divine plan or cosmic coincidence, at the dawn of creation, the dung beetle said, "Oh, for God's sake, I'll eat the cow shit if no one else will." But the dung beetle, like all other forms of life, depends on all other forms of life. From microorganisms to great white whales, it's a chain. Break that chain and all the money in the world will not save you from the ecological Armageddon that will engulf us all. So, what was to be done? Well, they were coming to that. They had a solution. They'd been working on it for a while. Everyone had a part to play, including Sly. "Mr. Morakark," said Slampacker, leaning back in his chair, "I'd like to tell you, if I may, about the Stark conspiracy." New chapter. Love among the radicals. During the meal at Slampacker's, such as it was, CD told Rachel about the film he'd thought they might go and see. As a preliminary to establishing his character as an active peace campaigner, he'd chosen a movie he'd read about recently in a groovy-ish mag. At the time, he had marked it down as the sort of film which he would rather be forced to eat than watch, but in the present circumstances, it suited his purpose. It's about the parallels between the way men run countries and the way they run their personal lives. I mean, the parallel between pricks and missiles is a bit laboured these days, but I suppose maybe because it's true. CD was desperately hoping that Rachel had not read the review he'd read. She hadn't, and he would have been gratified to know that she was thinking that he seemed an interesting sort of a bloke. A bit intense maybe, but a cut above the usual dag. In this respect at least, CD's plan was working. Rachel had always been a bit of a closet radical. She liked the feeling of talking about something that mattered. And so they finished their delicious Slampackers, except for the horrible bit of gherkin, which they both fished out, and went to the movie. As they had both suspected, it was well-meaning, but bloody awful. Its principles were presented with such horrible monolithic certainty that it would have turned Gandhi pro-nuke. Afterwards, the director gave a short speech. He did this after every performance of the 2-week run at the Little Arts Cinema. "Well, some people," the director said with what he believed to be a knowing smile, "can't see that missiles are penis extensions." "Oh yeah? Well, I don't know what's going to come flying towards us when some man pushes the button, but it certainly won't be a 50-foot flying cunt." This, the director considered, was not only a brilliant and conclusive point, but also a hilarious joke and his personal favourite. Although, in fact, he actually would not have known a joke if he'd found one hanging off his earring. "I think he was being cynical, talking like an idiot in order to make an astute point," said CD, putting on a brave face. He would have put pink icing and a cherry on it if he'd thought it'd get him any closer to Rachel's affections. "I think he was talking like an idiot because he is an idiot," replied Rachel. And CD, who agreed with her entirely, had to think about cold porridge and vinegar for 5 whole minutes to stop his monumental desire from becoming too obvious. Radically ineffectual. In the weeks that followed, they went to a benefit concert together and a discussion group and looked around the community bookshop and generally became a recognised feature of alternative haunts. All the time with CD anxiously impressing on Rachel what a committed, worthwhile individual he was. He need not have tried so hard. She liked him. It was his mates that annoyed her. Limpish, tired individuals, endlessly discussing how screwed up the world is, without apparently having very much intention of doing anything about it. They're dull, Colin. CD could not get her to call him CD. Your friends are dull. They're not going to save the world. CD could only shrug, beginning to wonder whether in constructing the fiction that the people from the community bookshop and local theatre collective were his soulmates, he might not have made a mistake. Right from the beginning, he'd pretended that he knew them all much better than he actually did. "Hi, Todd," he'd said casually to the bloke at the Peace bookshop the first time he'd taken Rachel down there. CD had checked out the name beforehand. He knew that if you address someone with sufficient familiarity, the chances are very good that they will presume that they know you, especially if the person is a hippie. The plan had worked perfectly, except for the fact that Todd had turned out to be a bit of a boring wanker, and CD now had to live with the fact that Rachel thought that he was Todd's mate. Well, CD, sensing his tactical error, had decided to try and distance himself from the wet types he had pretended to be so close to. There would be no more "Hi, Todds." He intended to remodel himself as a hard, practical man, looking for hard, practical solutions. He was even considering buying a penknife. Well, that was his plan anyway. Unfortunately, the whole thing was ruined by the return of the dreadful Karen. Tea break. The return of the dreadful Karen. CD had been innocently sitting in a cafe with Rachel when suddenly and without warning he and his cappuccino were enveloped by a mass of frizzy hair. "Hi," Karen cooed, and then demanded, "Hug, please." It made him ill to do it, but CD was obliged to provide a weak little squeeze. Uninvited, Karen plonked herself down, bags and hair everywhere. She liked to affect the attitude of always being in a slightly scatty rush, as if a great many people depended on her. "Can't stop," she said, stopping. "Christ, CD, haven't seen you since we got busted painting the road. What a night, man." "Since I got busted," replied CD, his heart sinking. He desperately hoped that Rachel had forgotten that he had slightly exaggerated his crime when they first met, claiming that he'd been arrested for trying to break into a US naval installation to prove that any terrorist could steal an atom bomb. "Was that the same night you tried to break into the naval installation?" asked Rachel. "Is this your new lady?" said Karen, giving Rachel what was intended to be a smile of radiant sisterly love. If there was one thing Rachel hated, it was the term lady. "Why don't you bring your lady?" "May I introduce my lady?" Rachel would have almost preferred anything. Girlfriend, bird. She would rather have been someone's casual fuck than their lady. "May I introduce my casual fuck, Rachel?" "No," answered CD. "This is Rachel, a friend of mine." "I see," said Karen with a touch of girlish innuendo, as if to suggest CD was concealing all sorts of delicious secrets, but that she wouldn't pry. "CD and I were nearly an item ourselves, weren't we?" she confided in a nauseating frank manner which was designed to suggest a modern woman who combined independence and vulnerability in equal measures. Karen stared at people when she spoke to them. At least they thought she was staring at them. Well, she thought she had a disarmingly frank and open countenance. CD wished the floor would open up and swallow him, even if he had been eating garlic and hadn't brushed his teeth for 3 days. "You look a bit uptight, love. You need a hug," Karen said, and then she delivered her knockout punch. "I know. I'll give you a massage." It was a vicious blow, and she delivered it below the belt. Well, CD was down. The umpire was counting him out. He dragged himself back from the brink and hit back. Yeah, Karen, isn't it? Well, look, we really have to go. Maybe catch you, whenever, okay?" It was good, but not good enough. As he rose, the waiter brought the food they'd ordered. "Now, you're really untogether, CD. Are you sure you're okay? Oh, wow, you're not. I mean, are these shoulders tense or what?" The claws descended on his shoulders and began to knead away like he was tomorrow's croissant. At that moment, CD discovered what Rachel and most women learn young, that if someone forceful decides they want to touch you and they present it as an act of friendship, it's almost impossible to stop them. CD and Rachel had been enjoying Sunday brunch at a cafe. It was a lovely, jolly morning despite the heat. CD had been contented, basking in the light of Rachel's radiant sauciness, and now the dark shadow of a wet hippie had fallen upon his happy idol. His food sneered up at him. It's extremely difficult to tackle waffles and maple syrup when someone is trying to wring your neck. CD did not know it, but the solution to his problem was very close. Not the problem of Karen, of course. She was insoluble, like the hairs she'd left in his coffee. Nor indeed the problem of how to persuade Rachel to let him have a go at her. That was a toughie too. Just the problem of how to deal with maple syrup. Because thousands of miles away, a highly trained team of specialists were working to make problems with maple syrup a thing of the past. Working, in fact, to make maple syrup a thing of the past. Dieback diplomacy. The crack unit was headed up by Wayne Strongman, a tough, two-fisted career diplomat who carried a personal phone like it was a sidearm and wore a laminated ID on his pyjamas. His job at present was stonewalling the Canadians on the problem of the US acid rain destroying the Canadian maple trees. Negative diplomacy, it was called, a job he knew well. He'd been a top troubleshooter in the Republican Party damage control group for the last 2 elections. What Wayne Strongman didn't know about twisting a statistic could be written on the back of a stockbroker's tax return. "The point is," he said with the quiet assurance that had made him such a feared prosecuting attorney and such a deeply loathed dinner party guest, "that your people have not been able to establish a direct and proven correlation." Henri Leconte, Strongman's opposite number, lost his rag. "I beg your bugger up pardon," he said. Got him, thought Strongman. An angry man at a conference table is a wide open target. He is a man saying, "Here is my ass, kick it." Leconte rose to the bait, shouting, "And then when every fuck maple tree in Quebec is bastard dead, then you won't need damn old bucket correlation. Is that it?" It is a strange thing about second languages. No matter how well the foreigner learns them, perhaps to the point where technically they speak even better than a native, no one is ever capable of swearing properly in any language other than their own. Leconte was a French Canadian, and as he himself often lamented in his strong French accent, "I never know when I need a bugger or where to put my bollocks." Now, Strongman was staring at him passively. Sorry, I didn't realise it was a French accent, or I would have tried to do the voice. But I realised too late, and I had already started speaking the character. Now, Strongman was staring at him passively. It enraged Leconte. "How much proof is required, hell bloody? Do the owners of your factories and power stations have to come to Canada and chop down the fuck trees themselves?" There was an embarrassed silence, which Strongman allowed to linger one beat into being seriously uncomfortable. His team knew well enough not to break an embarrassed silence. Sometimes it's what you don't say he often told them. Strongman had sent innocent men to the electric chair with a well-timed theatrical pause. "Henri," he said dispassionately to the red-faced French-Canadian, "I can understand you being upset. Clearly, it's not just a matter of lost revenue. To you guys, the maple tree is your national symbol." That was the way. Play it soft for a moment. But just a moment, just long enough for them to register that you're being conciliatory, and then hit them. But, frankly, I find the implications of your outburst deeply offensive. Well, I can only presume you feel that we on the US team are a bunch of dumb and unprincipled ecological vandals. He continued quickly before LeConte could agree with this. "Well, let me tell you, mister, you're barking up the wrong damn maple tree. Do you think we don't have maples in Ontario, New England? US kids got a sweet tooth too. If we can verify for certain what's killing the damn things, well, you may rest assured, sir, that the United States government will pursue it to hell and beyond and nail it to the wall, by crikey! But before I start closing factories, before I start putting men out of work and forcing their families into welfare, by heaven, I'm going to be as sure of my ground as an old pig, and that's hogshaw." He'd just made up the old pig metaphor. Strongman liked inventing pretend colloquialisms. It confused foreigners. "Mr. Strongman," said LeConte, badly wanting to kill him, 82% of the trees in the Beauce-Megantic region are showing signs of pollution. It's sulfur dioxide from your factories. 10 years from now, we will have no trees left. This is a world emergency. Quebec provides over 2/3 of the world's maple syrup. We've cut our acid rain. You've got to cut yours. We can't be sure. The connection isn't proven, said Strongman, reasonable again. Believe me, our top men, the best, they're on this thing. We're chasing it, Henri. Oh, yeah, we're chasing it like a pan-fried Tennessee whore with the clap, and that's finger-licking chasing. Oh, that was a good one, thought Strongman. They'd laugh about that tonight. He couldn't help but notice the secretary's admiring glance. Who knows, maybe... Anyway, he'd certainly waffled that dumb French kayak's maple syrup right up his sweet backside. You bet he had. LeConte, a native of Quebec, wanted to cry. With great sadness, he called upon his science officer to present the Canadian argument yet again. The negotiation machine would continue to produce bullshit at a comparable rate to the industrial production of acid rain. The US-Canadian dialogue had been going on for so long, it would certainly outlive the trees. It takes a maple tree about 5 years to perish from a phenomenon known as dieback. They die from the top down. Like a balding man, their branches recede. The syrup farmer taps his trees each year and watches them die by inches, becoming poor, sad, shabby shadows of their once mighty selves. This disaster is, of course, not confined to maple trees, but is beginning to affect the majority of all trees in the world. The fugwash. The waffles had gone cold, and CD's shoulders were numb. Finally, Karen released him. Anyway, I have really got to get my act together, said Karen, turning down a non-existent invitation to hang around. Boogaloo and Room Titty are probably coming around for supper tonight or some other time. It's so difficult to cook for yanyaroos. Karen had a habit common to many people who pride themselves on possessing approachable and open personalities. She referred to people that she knew as if everybody knew them. Ostensibly, this was because Karen believed that the world is actually full of love and there are quite enough artificial barriers created between people without constructing extra ones. Karen, I don't know any of these people you're talking about, CD had remarked on their one night together. Just because you don't know someone, Karen replied, doesn't mean you can't be a friend of theirs. She spoke with the same tone of happy confidence that Einstein must have used the first time he said E equals mc squared. In actual fact, her habit of trumpeting the names of her acquaintances was her way of reassuring herself that she had friends. Unfortunately, the effect of this habit on someone who didn't know better would clearly be to presume that CD and Karen were not only mates, but they shared much the same circle of friends. Obviously, this was disastrous for CD. After all, he'd only just made his decision that he must quickly dissociate himself from Karen's type, and suddenly, up pops Karen, blithely speaking as if she and CD balanced at the hub of the same social wheel. Or worse still, it was a wheel that appeared to include yanyaroos. Well, CD was right to feel concern on this last point. There are a lot of yanyaroos in WA, and Rachel, like many, found it extremely difficult to understand the fascination. She could not, for the life of her, see how wearing a picture of a bearded multimillionaire guru around your neck and dressing only in blue clothes could lead to spiritual enlightenment. Strangely, another person who found Yanyaruism a pretty surprising phenomenon was Yoga Phagwash, chief guru of the Yanyaru cult, whose picture it was that hung on Karen's friends Boogaloo and Rumtiti's chests. "I just don't understand it," he would say to his aides and girlfriends. "I tell all these middle-class white people to wear blue clothes and send me half their money, and they do." At first, the Yoga Phagwash, unable to believe his luck, had tried to keep up appearances, playing it all very spiritual, issuing poems and thoughts and mantras about enlightenment through denial. Well, after a while, though, his confidence began to grow. He began to experiment with the credulity of his followers, suggesting, for instance, that possessing 25 Rolls Royces was an intensely religious statement, and, what's more, not letting anyone else have a go in them maintained their purity and integrity. To Phagwash's relief and astonishment, there was no reaction. "They don't seem to care," he remarked in astonishment, while writhing in warm cocoa butter on a waterbed full of champagne. Just as an aside here, if you don't know, the Yanyaroos, they're analogous to their real life, the real life analogue of the Yanyaroos is the sannyasins, who were very, very big for a minute in the late 80s in Western Australia. You may have heard of the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. He was the owner of the said 28 Rolls Royces. Anyway, they were also called the Orange People. Rachel was convinced that originally the popularity of the cult had been based on its advocacy of free love. Phagwash was a monumental root rat himself and encouraged his disciples to go for it like a pack of rabbits on a weekend in Amsterdam. Yanyaroos were practically ordered to have it off willy-nilly. This is what annoyed Rachel. I mean, it's like a never-ending adolescent fantasy with God saying how great you are for snogging. Well, yuck! Well, CD wasn't so sure. He couldn't help thinking that if scripture lessons at his school had been one long feel-up session, there might have been a lot more converts to the Bible. Since the advent of AIDS, of course, everything had changed. The Yoga Phagwash had swung to the other extreme and had gone completely ape-mega-moral. The arch-wick dipper had become the arch-party pooper, possibly because he didn't want his source of income dying off. Phagwash went rubber glove mad. He had people putting a dustbin liner over their heads before they washed their own faces. It wasn't long before his disciples were having to wrap themselves in cling film before making a telephone call. Soon, if they wanted to go out, they'd probably have to have themselves laminated. The future of Yanyaruism lies in the balance. It is questionable whether people will want to give money to someone who says they can't have it off, or that Rachel was entirely indifferent to the future of the cult, but one thing was for sure. If CD was thinking of going to dinner at Karen's with Boogaloo and Rumtiti, Bastard was going on his own. Denial. Karen was finally going. She got up and kissed CD. For one appalling moment, Rachel thought she was going to kiss her. Thankfully, Karen confined herself to a squeeze of the shoulder, which was still over-familiar, considering it was based on an acquaintance of about 15 minutes. "Come round to dinner sometime, you must," was her parting shot. Rash and Basil and Tish and Blossom said they might probably come round one evening, or, if they don't, just some other time. Another big, sloppy smacker delivered on the lips through a cloud of frizziness. And she was gone. There was a pause. And then CD spoke. I have never met that woman before in my entire life.